Welcome to night 5 of How to Entertain Yourself in the Dark. So we still don't have any power, so I thought I would keep reading some ghost stories from Understanding is the New Healing. This one is called The Queen Scary. I was invited to speak a few years ago at a conference on board the illustrious and mysterious Queen Mary, which is permanently docked in Long Beach, California. If you have a few spare moments, Google the Queen Mary and read up on its amazing history as a luxury cruise liner in the 1930s, come troop carrier during World War II, retired to shore in the late 1960s. Many a movie star and dignitary graced her majestic decks, and she is full of tales of ghostly apparitions and supernatural phenomenon, adding to her haunting allure and mystique. From the moment we stepped on board, it was like being sucked into an outlandish time warp. I'd traveled with my dear friend and agent, Mairead Conlon, another Irish friend who had wanted to come along because she had never been to LA. The decor of the ship had been maintained from its heyday, right down to the impressive variety of wood wall paneling, opulent chandeliers, original toilets, and cast iron bathtubs complete with original salt water taps. She truly is a sight to behold. The day after I arrived, I was asked to be a guest on a radio show that was being broadcast that evening from the ship. As this episode on the paranormal came to a close, the hostess finished by asking me if I had experienced anything unusual since my arrival on the Queen Mary. In all honesty, all I could say was no. Up until that point, absolutely nothing untoward had taken place, except the terrible sinus problems I'd developed overnight, which I was putting down to the recirculated air on the 11-hour plane journey from Ireland to LA. No sooner than the statement had left my mouth that I had seen nothing out of the ordinary, the spirits decided to make a monkey out of me. I was standing by the doorway into the adjoining room of the splendid and stately suite where the show was being broadcast when all of a sudden a light flashed, much like the old-timey light bulb flash of a vintage camera. It was bright and made a popping noise. I looked at the other folks in the room, hoping they'd seen it too. Not only had they seen it, but we all noticed the sudden drop in temperature in the bedroom as compared to the sitting room, where we had just spent the last hour chatting live on air. I giggled and passed comment that it could have at least flashed before I'd made the declaration on international radio that nothing strange had happened to me aboard the world's most haunted ship. Little did I know, the fun was only beginning. I said my goodbyes as I entered into an endless corridor of identical antique doorways. With everything in its original state, it was like stepping out of a portal into the golden days of maritime travel. Left looked just like right, and I wasn't sure which way to go to get back to the lobby of the colossal ship. I eventually went left and found myself walking past door after door of infinite cabins and hidden walkways. I took another turn and suddenly realized I wasn't by myself. You know that feeling when you know you're not alone? When you can actually feel someone in your space? Not only could I feel it, but I heard giggling just as I turned around to see a little girl following me down the hall. She wore a drop-waist white dress with pleats at the bottom and a very large bow in her hair. She laughed because she knew I could see her. I joined in her merriment because I knew that she knew I could see her too. Why so strange? This child had drowned in the ship's swimming pool during a voyage with her family well over half a century earlier. I went up to my room, the second room that we had moved to because the first room we'd been assigned was like an icebox. My friend and I made our way up to the observatory bar, a beautiful example of classic Art Deco design. We settled down for a bite to eat and a chat. I was telling her about my earlier escapades with the little girl in the corridors, when a man behind her in the far corner of the bar caught my eye. It wasn't his dashing good looks that commanded my attention, but the look of sheer surprise on his face that I had noticed him. I couldn't help but stare as he stared right back. Dressed in a tan-colored maintenance man's uniform, and as in the flesh as every other person that was alive in the bar, I nearly choked on a tortilla chip as he stepped left and went straight through the wall and out to the observation deck. Before I could tell my friend what was happening, the man leaned back through the wall with only the upper half of his body, as if to let me know that I wasn't just seeing things. It turns out that back in the day, there had been a fire drill on the ship and a worker had been accidentally crushed to death as a watertight door was sealing shut. Oddly enough, I didn't get the sense that it was the man who had been killed that I was seeing. It felt like it was a man who had unwittingly been responsible for his co-worker's untimely demise who was staring me in the eyes. Cue creepy music. On the Saturday night of the 3-day conference, a ghost tour had been organized for some of the seminar participants and guest speakers. The loveliest man had come along with a satchel full of ghost hunting equipment, including a device that converted frequencies into phonetics, allowing a spirit to communicate with those who don't have the ability to hear them without assistance. My Irish friend who had traveled with me had become quite the paranormal photographer, taking some amazing pictures of orbs around the Queen Mary. One photo, which had been taken down in the bowels of the ship, clearly showed a man in a cap and a young girl with a big red bow in her hair. When we were in the boiler room, reputed to be the hottest hotspot of paranormal activity, our ghost hunter, John, was picking up a lot of chatter on his EMF devices. He was so gentle in his attempts to coax the spirits to move into the light, telling them that they were loved, that it was safe for them to return home. He was so sweet, in fact, it was not only endearing, but comical. Anyone who knows me is well aware that I don't fare well in situations where I'm supposed to act serious, especially when something funny is afoot. You are loved. All is safe and well. You can move into the light now. You are beautiful. We all love you. John gently continued to coerce the spirits. I was childishly snickering in the corner. It struck me so hilarious, I simply couldn't help myself. As he continued to compassionately guide these lost souls, the EMF box made a very distinct clamor. I stopped dead in my tracks and said, "Did that just say what I think it said?" I was now in the horrors of laughter as John's jaw dropped to the floor. Much to my relief, he began to laugh heartily too. In response to John's sincere and polite commands, a mechanical voice had spoken out, very clearly I might add, from one of his devices. Somewhat reminiscent of the unmistakable robotic communique of scientific genius Stephen Hawking, the box loudly squawked back, "Fuck you." I nearly collapsed. The following year, I had the opportunity to revisit Her Majesty, the Queen Mary. This time, I was delighted to bring my favorite travel companion along for the adventure. My mother, Mama Helen, is the most elegant and lively 89-year-old, well, she's 95 now, Southern belle, and is every bit as regal as the Queen Mary herself. I couldn't wait to get her on board to see what kind of antics would unfold. I was speaking at another conference and was delighted to be back with my dear friends in LA. On the previous year's trip to Long Beach, I had experienced the most unusual visitor one night after I'd gone to sleep. I awakened to see a very palpable apparition standing next to my bed, simply looking at me. In his hands, he held a diamond necklace, the kind you'd see draped around the neck of a Hollywood starlet in the 1940s. I asked this specter if I could help him in some way. Apparently, he'd only come to brag in front of someone who possessed the ability to actually hear and appreciate a story. He explained that in 1933, he had stolen this necklace from a passenger when the ship had sailed as a luxury cruise liner prior to World War II. That was it. No other message. Just a spirit that wanted to toot his own horn. I found the visit peculiar and highly amusing. Now, the following year, I was eager to see if my mother would get to experience any of the ghoulish shenanigans of the Queen Mary. My lovely agent, my Irish angel Mairead, had traveled over from Ireland. I'd flown ahead of her in order to stop in Virginia to pick up my mother before carrying on to LA. Mom absolutely adored being on the ship, particularly because the view out of our portal window was across the water from the oil rigs. This location had been the base for the Navy ship on which my grandfather Judge had been the ship's doctor in World War II. Mom's family had lived near Long Beach for a short time when she was just a child, so it was a special sort of homecoming for her. Of course, I had told Mom all about the ethereal entertainment that had taken place on the ship during my last visit. She'd been particularly intrigued by the diamond thief of yesteryear. When Mom and I crossed the threshold into our cabin for the first time, the necklace I'd been wearing all day suddenly flew off my neck and landed halfway across the room. Mom said it looked as if it had been ripped right off my neck and flung to the floor. We joked that the jewelry thief must be excited to see me, again because once again, he had the ear of the girl who could actually hear him brag about his infamous heist. Mom wanted to shower after the long flight, so I went 2 steps across the corridor into Mairead's cabin for a cup of tea and a chat. About 20 minutes later, I went back to my cabin because Mom was calling my name in an anxious, excited sort of way. Mary Helen! Mary Helen! There stood Mom in her little shower cap and dressing gown with the strangest look on her face. Did you do this? She asked with a nervous laugh. Do what? I'd only just walked back into the room and I'd left it before she'd even gotten into the shower. Look at this! Mom was absolutely stupefied. There on the dressing table, Mom's trifold satin jewelry pouch had been unfolded, and her necklaces and earrings were stacked one on top of the other in the shape of a Christmas tree. She'd brought a necklace to wear that was an old show jumping medal made of gold filigree dating back to the early 1900s. The delicate chain, which had been sealed in a separate Ziploc baggie, was now wrapped around each intricate handcrafted letter of the medallion with absolute precision. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I was over the moon that the paranormal activities were wasting no time getting underway. We'd only been on board for a few hours. Mairead came flying into our room when she heard all of the commotion. It was then that she declared on the spot, I want absolutely nothing to do with anything spooky, scary, ghostly, or paranormal while I am on this ship. I am not kidding. She was now yelling at the ceiling while Mom and I were in the knots of laughter. She walked out our door, made an exaggerated wave of the hand around her cabin door, and proclaimed, This room is protected by my angels. Don't even think about coming near me. Her finger was wagging furiously in thin air. And would you believe, for 2 solid weeks, while others were seeing and hearing all sorts of strange things, Mairead saw, heard, or felt nothing. Nada. Zip. Zilch. Another private ghost tour had been organized just as it had been the previous year, and I was so delighted that my mother was fit and well enough in her late 80s to walk every square inch of the ship without assistance. She looked adorable in her summer white outfit, always with a trusty cardigan in case the air conditioning was a bit too chilly. Our tour guide was an absolute character and informed us that he had also performed in a drag show in his spare time. He fell in love with Mom, and she thought he was the cat's meow. His energy and passion made each and every ghost story come to life. He took Mom by the hand and personally walked her down the many flights of stairs into the engine room. I stood next to Mom as he told the tale of the maintenance man who'd been severed in two when the watertight door slammed shut on him during a routine fire drill. Mom turned to me in the middle of the talk and said she'd felt someone put a hand on her. I was the only one standing directly next to her, and I wouldn't have been able to keep a straight face if it had been me. She was totally serious and insisted that she hadn't just been caught up in the atmosphere and imagined it. When we emerged from the bottom of the ship, Mom found a bench to sit on for a little rest. She went to put her cardigan around her shoulders, as we were now actually outside of the ship and there was a nip in the air. As she pulled the sweater around her, both of us gasped. On the sleeve of her pristine white cardigan was a perfect, greasy black handprint. I told you someone grabbed me. She was more excited than alarmed. When our tour guide came over to see what all the fuss was about, he had that, this is not part of the tour look on his face. He was truly dumbfounded, begging Mom to report it to the front desk, where ongoing records were kept of ghostly interactions encountered by passengers. If nothing else had happened on the entire trip, Mom would have been perfectly satisfied. To this day, that cardigan has never been washed, hangs in a plastic bag in the closet, and comes out whenever Mom gives a program to any one of her book clubs or church groups about her time aboard the Queen Mary. Interesting stories of the Queen Mary, you say, but what does it have to do with a new understanding of healing of any sort? Well, there's one more story that I hope will be of use to anyone out there who has ever dealt with a haunted property. What I'm about to share isn't the end-all and be-all of answers to every haunted location, but for me, it created a new awareness that had never been a possibility in my mind until it was perfectly explained to me. On our second stint aboard the Queen Mary, some friends had decided to stay in the most famous cabin the ship had to offer, the Winston Churchill Suite. Churchill had spent a considerable amount of time in the 1940s aboard the Grey Ghost, his mistress of the sea, and had quite an affinity for her. Passengers who had previously stayed in the Churchill Suite had reported sudden and very strong-smelling cigar smoke, extreme temperature changes, clacking and banging, in addition to a host of other paranormal activities. One morning, during the course of my 2-week stay, I was sitting on the edge of my bed after taking a shower. I had leaned forward, hanging my head down to towel dry my hair. When I flipped my head back up, there he was. An apparition of Winston Churchill, as clear as day, was right there in front of me. To many, I'm sure this seems pretty strange, but for someone who has been talking to the spirit world all of her life, it wasn't such a big shock. I guess if there was any shock, it was who I was having a conversation with as opposed to what I was speaking to. This chat will forever be in my heart because this essence of Churchill so thoroughly explained a concept that had me completely perplexed. Most of the time when I am communicating with those who have crossed over, or even with those who never lived in this realm in the first place, it is in order to pass on information that is relevant or helpful to another individual's healing or soul progression. Only in recent years have I dealt with a higher number of entities that are hanging about with the intention of lowering vibration, doing damage, or attempting to temporarily disrupt a person's higher good, ultimately for their higher purpose. I had always wondered if a house or property or even a person was haunted by one or multiple spirits. Did this mean that these spirits were all trapped here, unable to move into the light and carry on with their soul's evolution? Come on, stuck? Imprisoned? All of them? For example, it really bothered me that so many people would report seeing this little girl with the big red bow on board of the Queen Mary. She had drowned in the ship's swimming pool and had been hanging around ever since. The maintenance man who was killed during the fire drill, there had been multiple sightings of this poor guy. It really bugged me that no one with the capacity to assist these spirits into the light had been successful in doing so, in addition to the fact that these captive souls had failed to progress, and this was being capitalized on as a selling point for the ship's visitor trade. It was Winston Churchill, or some part of his spirit, who cleared this up for me. Churchill reminded me that just as I had experienced in my own near-death event, the soul and its conscious connection to the life or lives it has experienced on Earth lives on after the physical form expires. He explained that just as we here on Earth enjoy going to amusement parks, allowing our intelligent minds to take temporary leave of that which we know to be real, spirits who dwell in the alternate reality that is tethered to the Earth plane enjoy contributing to or partaking in the same type of entertainment. In his earthly life as Churchill, he had a great fondness for the Queen Mary and all she had to offer. When she was permanently docked, there had to be a way to sustain her as a playground for visitors in search of the same thrill that she had offered in her heyday as a working vessel. Rather than a fate of deteriorating to rust and ruin, a sort of holographic adventure playground was put in place to embellish the material renovations and repairs of the magnificent floating hotel, assuring her continued success. Knowing that I speak the language of frequency, I was told that the vibration of expectation had everything to do with the way people would experience their time on board Her Majesty. For those who entered the engine room, for example, with the anticipation that they would see, hear, or feel something out of this world, the frequency of their expectation could trip a switch of sorts, setting into motion a holographic series of events that would match or exceed their wildest dreams. Therefore, the girl with the bow, the maintenance man, and even my friend the jewelry thief were projected phantasmagorias or optical illusions set up by those in spirit with a connection to the Queen Mary, who had an interest in seeing her live on well into the future. These images work on a loop, providing visual, auditory, and kinesthetic realities for those who are in search of them. It's also for this reason that my friend Mairead was able to spend 2 weeks on the Queen Mary without seeing or hearing a single thing, while those around her were reporting the most fantastic experiences of the supernatural. She had emphatically declared that she would not witness, therefore her vibration did not match or set anything out of the ordinary into motion. My mother, on the other hand, could not wait to see something mystical, and her frequency of expectation created an entirely different experience during her stay. No soul was trapped, forever doomed to wander the halls of nautical antiquity, yet anyone who was able to trip the vibration of a haunted encounter was in for the time of their life. This is certainly not the case in every location that reports paranormal activity, as circumstances are as varied as the people who live them. There are other reasons, ley lines, vortices, earthbound entities, and a host of other factors that can be responsible for mystical happenstances. That's a book all on its own. For me, this was a most beneficial revelation in my development as a facilitator of healing. I will always have a soft spot for the Queen Mary, as well as Winston Churchill, because of our unique encounters, and the new understandings they provided. When in the business of assisting others to comprehend the intricacies of how our minds, bodies, and spirits actually operate, new insights, especially those from the other side, are unreservedly invaluable.